Welcome back to Small Caps, ladies and gentlemen. My name, as you all probably know by now, is Kerry Stevenson. And today I've got a really exciting nickel story for you. It's called Lunnon Metals, LM8, based over in the west in the Kambalda district. Now, some of you will know Kambalda is very, very synonymous for nickel. Ed Ainscough is the managing director. He's pretty excited at the moment. It's great to see you, Ed. Brilliant results out, which we'll talk about in a moment. But we've not spoken to you before on Small Caps, so I'm excited to have you on today. Can you just share with our listeners who are Lunnon Metals? How did you get started? And then we'll get into some detail.
Cool. Good afternoon, Kerry. Thanks for having us. Lunnon Metals, we listed in June last year, raised $15 million on June 16th. Like any of those stories where things happen overnight, everyone thought that was kind of the big job. We're actually a company that's been in existence since 2014 as a private entity, previously called ACH Nickel, set up by three high net worth individuals who'd made some good money in the iron ore boom in the early 2000s, along with a Chinese company that they were very closely associated with. And during 2013, 2014, they approached me, asked me to head up a private investment search for assets during the downtime, if you can remember the downtime, Kerry.
Very well, Ed. I think we all can.
Not many people do when it's up, but it was down.
Yeah.
So we were a bit counter-cyclical. We had a small amount of money, and we set about using our experience and our contacts to go hunting for assets. And the first one we found was a joint venture in Kambalda with a company.
But just let me stop you before you go on, though, because when you say experience, you were with WMC for a while, weren't you? Western Mine?
Yeah. So first landed in Australia in 1987, left again, got kicked out after 12 months.
Did you? Why'd you get kicked out? Did we not like you?
I was only on a 12-month visa. So I worked in the mines for 12 months, met my wife on the way out in Queensland. And then after 6 years of working around the world in copper in Zambia and tin back in England, in Cornwall, and then on the west coast of New Zealand, I got a job back in Kambalda in 94. And then from 94 right through to 2001, was working for WMC, worked my way up, ended up as the chief geologist at St Ives, and was the last chief geologist before those assets were sold to South African company Goldfields when they made their first acquisition in Australia back at the end of 2001. So we all got sold with the furniture, and I transferred across to Goldfields as their first chief geologist at St Ives. And then after a year or so at the mine, they were very kind to promote me down to Perth, move into business development. So I spent another 6 or 7 years with Goldfields before I left Goldfields in 2008. So in terms of those high net worths who set up the private company, there were three. They were all ex-WMC Kambalda people. A gentleman by the name of Ian Junk, who's probably the best known of the directors now, who's got a long history with restarting nickel mines. A guy called Darren Headley, who's also been MD of listed companies in the past. They're both mining engineers in Kambalda. We're all neighbours of each other, and a Chinese Australian called Tao Li, who was the geotechnical manager at Kambalda. So we knew the town really well, and we were blessed in some regard because Goldfields kind of approached us in 2014 because of our background, because of our familiarity with the assets, with the company, and because of their success with their iron ore investment in the 2000s. We sat down and we negotiated a joint venture. That joint venture ran from 2014 right through to the listing last year. Okay. We were progressively earning in. It's quite a long period of earning. And then sitting down, because we've got a great relationship with Goldfields, both at the site but also corporately, we agreed to convert it from a private joint venture into a public listed company. So we crystallised our interest the day we listed in the joint venture, and then we acquired the other half of the joint venture from Goldfields by giving them shares in the company. So they ended up as our major shareholder with 32% of the company.
I was about to ask what it got. So Goldfields have got 32%?
Yep, thereabouts.
And your top 20 own 77%. So it's a very tightly held register, only about 140 million shares on issue as well. Now, you haven't listed that long ago. You raised 15 million, as you said, on the listing. And the focus is these assets in Kambalda. So let's talk a little bit about those assets.
Yeah, well, it's a relatively small area. There's 19 mining leases, adds up to 23 square kilometres. So when you look at the map, it can actually look like quite a small area. But in terms of strike extent of the prospective geology in Kambalda, we've got about 12 strike kilometres of what's called the nickel contact, which is the contact between the football basalt in Kambalda called the Lunnon basalt, and that's who the company's named after. And then the famous Kambalda komatiite, which sits in the hanging wall, and all the nickel that's ever been found in Kambalda or Widgemoors that sits at the base of that komatiite or very close to the base of that komatiite. So it's a really important contact in terms of the Kambalda district from a prospectivity exploration point of view. So we've got 12 strike kilometres of that contact and 2 historical mines, Foster and Jan. And between them, they produced over 90,000 nickel tonnes during their operational period. But I guess most importantly, those 2 assets were shut down in the 80s and 90s by WMC. And so they were closed when WMC made the strategic decision to exit Kambalda nickel mine ownership at the end of the 90s. And that's when they sold the mines to the likes of Mincor, Independence and Panoramic, and set those 3, at the time, small junior companies on a trajectory that has seen Independence for however many $1 billion Independence is now. I think Mincor is nearly $1 billion. And they did fabulously well buying those historical WMC mines just before the last nickel boom in kind of the mid-2000s. I think nickel peaked in Australian dollar terms somewhere around high $40,000, $50,000 a tonne in 07, 08. So those small companies were well capitalised. They were much more nimble than WMC. WMC got the ore from those companies to put it through their Kambalda concentrator. So it was a win-win for both WMC, Nickel West now, BHP, and those junior companies. But our assets had been shut down, and our assets got sold to Goldfields, who were one of the world's biggest, still are one of the world's biggest gold companies. So our assets lay fallow for the entire period through 15 years with virtually no meaningful exploration carrying on. Yeah,
because Goldfields are just looking at it going, well, that's of no interest to us. It just came as part of the package. Is that what's happening?
Yeah, look, that's a reasonable way to summarise it. Remember, I was a Goldfields chief geologist and then an executive. So when you've just been bought by a big gold company and they spent $480 million buying St Ives and Agnew back in 2001, their sole focus was for gold. So they didn't want anything to get in the way. At the time, WMC, Nickel West now, wanted to keep some of the rights to the nickel mines on the Goldfields ground, and Goldfields said, no. Look, we're paying a lot of money. We want unaffected access and ownership of these tenements. So WMC, now Nickel West, retains an option on the offtake of our ore. They've got the right to match or preempt before we do a deal with anyone else. And that's kind of the last legacy from that deal now 20 years ago, unbelievably. So those assets kept fallow. The Goldfields weren't interested in nickel. They didn't want things to get in the way, and they wanted to aggressively explore. And they've done an amazing job at St Ives. I mean, I think when we got sold, we produced 5 million ounces or thereabouts and had 3 in reserve, and now they're up to 15 million ounce field. So they've done an amazing job, put a lot of money in, created a lot of value. But
Ed, why didn't anyone else approach Goldfields about these nickel assets? Because nickel, okay, it's not a nickel boom at the moment, but we might be on the footwall of coming up. Nickel's getting pretty exciting at the moment with this new energy environment that we're coming into. Why have they sat, as you said just before, fallow?
Well, I think plenty of companies have approached them. And when I was at Goldfields, I did do a deal. I actually sold the Beta Hunt mine, which is also in Canada. Yeah, I sold that to Paul Chapman at Reliance.
Yeah.
And I if you know the Beta Hunt story, it's a 3-dimensional sublease. I actually created that sublease with a bottle of wine, sitting on my laptop in bed, trying not to wake up my wife while I was designing this 3-dimensional sublease. So yes, we did sell some assets, and other people no doubt approached Goldfields after I left and before we did the joint venture. But I think that's kind of a point of differentiation for both myself and the board and the company in general, is that deep knowledge, that intrinsic understanding of what it meant to Goldfields to run that ground, to not be disturbed or annoyed or to have someone on. That's why the relationships work so well, because we probably see ourselves as Kambalda people first, and then ex-WMC and ex-Goldfield people second, and almost last we see ourselves now as Lunnon Metals.
Do you think that it is an advantage for you, first of all, to have the relationship with Goldfields, and secondly, as you just said, it's about Kambalda? You know this area, you've worked this area for a long time. Is that how, and I'm going to be a bit naughty here, is that how you got lucky, Ed?
Well, you make your own luck, Kerry. That's for sure. Look, I've often wondered, there's like this invisible umbilical cord that seems to be attaching between me and Kambalda, my exploration manager, Aaron Whirl. I picked him up as a graduate from the airport in Kalgoorlie in 1996, and he, like me, has almost been there ever since in different guises. So if of all the places you could be stuck associated with on the planet geologically, Kambalda's got to be one of the best places, nickel and gold. So,
nickel and gold in Kambalda, absolutely. Well,
I mean, there's just ore bodies in every orientation. You've got nickel and gold, you've got open pit, you've got underground. That's why it's been such a fantastic training ground for geologists and mining engineers, both from WMC days and through to Goldfields. So, yeah, it's a pretty special place, and we're very lucky to have what's a small part, but an important part of the nickel story there.
I want to talk, because this is an investor audience, Ed, and you've come up with some really good drilling results. I want to go through those drilling results, and I also want to explain to people, I guess, the significance of those and how you came across. So let's talk about the release that you've had, a couple this week. I think it's called the Baker Shoot. Those assays have really given you a very strong start to, well, an extraordinary start to 2022. Let's just get straight to the point. Let's talk about that. Did you expect to hit what you did?
We were confident we'd hit nickel. I'd be lying.
Oh, I'd hope so.
I'd be lying. Well, you never know with exploration. That's why if it was easy, everyone would be doing it. We were confident we'd hit nickel. We had an exploration target in the prospectus that was circling this area around as an area of interest. And the reason it was a high priority area for us was because WMC had drilled some diamond holes. They're on about a broad 100 to 150 metre spacing. They clipped little bits of nickel. None of it was particularly exciting. And probably most importantly, it wasn't on that contact I was telling you. It was just above it. So there's nickel on that contact between the basalt and the ultramafic, but there's often nickel at the base of what's called the second flow, which is up in the ultramafic. It's about 40 to 50 metres above the contact. So we had these WMC holes, these framework of holes. They were a bit underwhelming. We had an exploration target. I think it was 500,000 tonnes at 1.5%. And then in October, we were thinking, well, the assay turnaround, if your investors probably know that a lot of companies being cursed in these COVID times with not being able to get their results back because the labs are under pressure. And we thought, well, we can't sit here for 3 months waiting for assay results before I do our next program. So we were pretty confident it was nickel there. And we just said, come on, let's just drill it out. And we drilled out 40 by 40. And we were just, I cannot believe that we're hitting 7, 9, 10% nickel. Massive sulfides, just 100 metres down, right in the middle of a WMC drill pattern in 2022. After that,
how did they miss it? Because I'll go into the 7, 9, 10% because I want people to understand, and maybe we can compare it to the ounces of gold, for example. Is it? Again, I'll go back to, is it just luck or did you do some planning? I'm not taking away from you, Ed, but I'm just going, really? They did some drilling there.
Yeah, look, you, at the time, remember the late 60s, early 70s, WMC famously found all the nickel there was to find in Kambalda, got on to everything, really, in the first 6 to 7 years, just by being super aggressive. And at the time, they were probably, at their heyday, they were running 10 to 15 different nickel mines between Kambalda and Witchy-Mulford. So their hurdles, their investment criteria on their exploration criteria for honing in on something would have been completely different. So It's not really a question of WMC missing it. But to be honest, back to your point about serendipity, you could not place this high-grade mineralisation in any other orientation and WMC not have hit it. So it literally is raking through the old drilling in a line that you think, well, just someone's looking after us. It's almost uncanny how it's oriented, that WMC were right around it, but not actually get any hole in it. If they'd hit what we'd hit, they would have drilled it out, and they probably would have mined it 50 years ago. So,
which they didn't, but you're about to. And
I won't get that far. We think there's a lot more to be found.
And again, that's what I want to talk about. So let's talk about the assays and the intercepts that you've had. 7 metres at 9.22% nickel. For those that go, well, is that good or bad? Because there are people, there are investors out there will go, I don't know what that means. Explain, if you wouldn't mind. Good hit, that sort of 7.
Yeah, is that good or bad? It's really good. I've spent most of my geological and business development career in gold, and I always feel bad converting things back to gold because it's like somehow that gold's better than the other metals, but I tend to do it. I don't do it as much as I used to, but I do tend to do it. But simply put, if gold is, say, around $2,500 an ounce, or whatever it is in US, right now nickel's at about $23,000 a ton. So there's a factor of 10 between there. So very simply, if you take a nickel percent and times it by 3 and then forget the percent and just call it grams a ton, so 10% nickel is roughly about 30 grams a ton gold, or an ounce. So to answer your question, are these results any good? Yeah, they're pretty good. Yeah, I'm quite happy with them.
Okay, look, we don't have a lot of time left, so let's just run very quickly, if you wouldn't mind. What's the news flow going? What now? Because we're talking in January, we're into 2022. These results are fantastic. There's more to come, I'm sure. Yeah. What's the news flow for those people looking, going, Lunnon Metals, hadn't heard of them, going to have a check this out. What are you doing? How many rigs? What's going on?
Well, we've got 2 rigs. We've got an RC rig and a diamond rig. Baker is the talk of the town, so we'll be going back. The thing, as I've obviously probably given you and your viewers the idea that these grades and these thicknesses were a bit better than we were expecting. So we're going to go back in and we're going to use both RC and diamond, both to try and infill and chase those high grade and those thicker zones where they're still open. Baker's not the only prospect we've got, though. So we've got the old Foster mine, and we're working up from the old core, and there's a lot of old WMC core in the mining areas where we can cut and get assays and bring what were historical estimates that aren't JORC compliant into JORC. So we have that as a string to our bow. We've got an area that comes off the side of the Foster mine called Warren, where there was quite a small resource, but we've been, again, quite aggressive with our deep diamond drilling, and we drilled about 8.7 metres at 3.5%, again, sitting between WMC holes that were barren. So one of the things we're learning is don't be scared of the gaps. The gaps are opportunities. Just because WMC didn't drill it doesn't mean there couldn't be thick, high-grade nickel in between it. So between Warren, between Foster, between Baker, they're kind of our pressing priorities. But we're starting deep drilling underneath the other historical nickel mine, Jan Shaft, which shut in 1986. It's only 500 metres deep when it shut. So we're putting a deep program underneath that. And we've got a government grant hold to drill both a gold and a nickel target. We don't talk much about the gold, but we've got the gold rights over most of the tenement package too. Okay. And we're drilling a deep conceptual gold target on a mag anomaly. So it's going to be a busy period. We're starting off with 1 RC rig, 1 diamond rig, and that's more to do to just make sure that we do. Kambalda is all about quality of the geology. It's not necessarily much about the volume. The ore bodies are like needles in haystacks. When you find them, they're fabulously rewarding, but you really need to be conscientious and do proper geology. So it's more about quality than quantity. But having said that, we drilled so much at Baker that we've got another 2 lines to come back. Then we'll be moving into a resource estimation phase for that initial maiden resource at Baker.
Okay. In terms of corporately, just over 140 million shares on issue. For those of you that were at the PADA Media Conference in October last year, where Ed presented, share price is at about 43 cents. It's now sitting over 90 cents. For those people that are looking and saying, well, it's had a good run, listen, do your own research, ladies and gentlemen. This is just a conversation. What would you say to a potential shareholders about where the value upside is going forward?
Well, probably the easiest analog to draw is Mincor. Mincor is a $900 to $1 billion market cap company. David South and the MD's done an amazing job. They're restarting their nickel mines. I think they're close to first ore at their Discovery Cassini over at Widgemalton. I think they've hit first ore at North Durkin. And on the back of Mincor restarting, they're restarting the Kambalda concentrator. So that's probably, that's a roadmap we'd like to set ourselves to. Now, Mincor's much bigger and much further advanced in terms of their pre-development and being close to mining. But the beauty of what Mincor, their success, is that Nickel West, BHP have opened up the concentrator. So the really attractive thing for us in the Kambalda district is we are kind of capital light. There's no processing facility, no processing capex required once we permit the mines for mining and have the capital to restart Foster. And Baker being so shallow is also capital light. I think the roadmap between where we are now, I can't believe I'm even thinking this, but where might we be at the end of the year is we want to be as far along that path to to mimic a mini Mincor as we possibly can, and take advantage of the fact that if the ore goes, if the mineralisation we extract goes to Nickel West, I mean, it's only 25 kilometres away. So it's just really exciting. Yeah. So we kind of went into this thinking that Foster had to be opened up and restarted, but now we found Baker. Now we're thinking, well, Baker could actually come before Foster or go in parallel to Foster. So we've gone from being a bit blinkered about the old mine Foster and actually realising that we've actually found something completely separate that we can mine independent, brand new. It's so that's exciting. So hopefully people get to see we're pretty excited. I can
see your excitement. What's your market cap at the moment? About what's your current market cap?
I don't carry those. It's 141 shares times 141 million times whatever the price is. So if it's 90 cents.
Yeah, 90 cents. So it's about.
Must be 115-ish, 110, 115.
I just wrote 100, so about 110 million. Mincor's 900 million. That's where he wants to go, ladies and gentlemen. But we're running out of time, Ed. People know I always ask this. 3 reasons why investors should be sitting up and taking notice of Lunnon Metals ASX code LM8 right now. Well, I think I can see the excitement with you anyway, so maybe we don't need to do the 3, but do the 3 anyway, Ed.
So, yeah, number 1, if people want to be invested in nickel, and gee, the macro scene for nickel looks pretty attractive, then Kambalda's where you want to be. It's one of the world's most renowned nickel belts. 2, if you're interested in nickel and you're interested in Kambalda, you've only got 2 choices through the ASX. One's Mincor, which we just mentioned, and then the other one is us. So we've got about a fifth of the resource of Mincor. We've got 39,000 nickel tonnes already in JORC, and I'm hoping people see that we can grow that aggressively. And number 3, like I said just previously, we're capital light. So we can go from where we are to where we might get to without a huge amount of capital, and we're very close to the Kambalda concentrator. So it's just a really exciting time, both for us internally, but also hopefully for the shareholders to live that journey between having just listed and made a discovery through to what might be in the future.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. If you haven't seen Ed's getting pretty excited about this discovery he's got and the upside going forward, then you must be asleep and not watching properly. The ASX code, as I said right at the start, is LM8. Lunnon Metals taking 2022 by storm, but there's a lot more to come. Ed Ainscough, thank you so much for joining me on Small Caps today.
My pleasure, Kerry. Thanks for having us.